Something that has also been on my mind recently, well, I say recently, but really, it's been on my mind for a good few years now. So, to all my fellow rail fans who have interest in steam locomotives and trains in general from different countries, I'm sure you all know about the Canadian National Steam Locomotive number 3254. Okay, maybe not all of you, but at least a few of you. I've made it no secret to YouTube and to the people I know over the years that 3254 is my favourite steam locomotive in the world, as it is many other people's as well. And I've also made it no secret over the years how badly I want it to run again, as do many other people as well. I know that this locomotive might be quite famous because back in the 80s its whistle was recorded and is now frequently used in a lot of cartoons, films and etc. However, a lot of rail fans, particularly those in the UK, which is my home for example, don't know about 3254. So to all my fellow rail fans and perhaps everyone else who doesn't know about this locomotive, I know that its story has been told a good few times before, but still, for those of you who don't know about it, I'll just give you all some key details about it and also give you all a summary of the history of this locomotive. And I'll try and keep it as brief as possible. Canadian National number 3254 is an S1B class 282 Mikado type steam locomotive. It was built in December of 1917 by the Canadian Locomotive Company for the Canadian Government Railway, and it was originally numbered 2854. However, that next year, the Canadian Government Railway merged with the Canadian Northern Railway to create the Canadian National Railway, and the locomotive was relettered from Canadian Government to Canadian National and renumbered from 2854 to 3254. 3254 had considerable pulling power. It could climb grades with ease. It used to haul heavy freight trains, and it was one of 466 S-Class 282 Mikado type steam locomotives. So that shows you just how successful and reliable 3254 and all of its classmates were. On the 24th of July 1941, 3254 got into a very nasty head-on collision with Great Northern Railway H5 class 462 Pacific type steam locomotive number 1351, which left both locomotives badly damaged, 3 people severely injured and 2 people dead. 1351 was scrapped shortly after the accident, while 3254 was repaired by CN and continued operating for another 16 years. However, this accident left the locomotive with a severely damaged frame which never got repaired, a decision that would come back to haunt it many years later. After making its final revenue service run in December of 1957, 3254 was later officially retired in February of 1958. It would sit in storage for 3 years before being bought in November of 1961 by a motel owner named Willis F. Barron. He originally planned to run the locomotive on a branch line in Reading, Pennsylvania. However, those lines got ripped up before he could put his plan into action. So 3254 was disassembled, transported via truck, and reassembled outside of his motel, where it would remain on static display there for 21 years. In the 1970s, Willis had given up hope on trying to restore 3254 to operating condition and tried to sell the locomotive to the Adirondack Railroad in Lake Placid, New York. However, for whatever reason, the locomotive never got transported there. In 1982, however, 3254 eventually did get sold to the Gettysburg Railroad in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. The locomotive was disassembled, transported via truck, and reassembled again, and then restored to operating condition in 1985, where it would be part of the operating fleet at Gettysburg for 2 years. Then, in the early summer of 1987, Steamtown, USA in Scranton, Pennsylvania needed a larger and more powerful locomotive to operate their longer excursions. So they struck a deal with Gettysburg where they would give Steamtown 3254, and in exchange, Gettysburg would get the Canadian Pacific G5D Class 462 Pacific type steam locomotive number 1278. After being moved to Steamtown, USA in Scranton, Pennsylvania, 3254 was relettered to Delaware, Lackawanna and Western and renumbered to 1271. This livery and number didn't last long, however, and the locomotive was soon relettered and renumbered back to Canadian National 3254 and resumed operation from there. 3254 became one of Steamtown's mainline excursion locomotives, where it ran alongside two other locomotives, said locomotives being the Canadian Pacific G3C Class 462 Pacific type steam locomotive number 2317 and the Baldwin Locomotive Works 060 switcher locomotive number 26. The locomotive proved to be very popular with many rail fans, and it pulled excursion trains throughout the late 1980s, the whole of the 1990s, the whole of the 2000s, and into the early 2010s. Unfortunately, in 2012, 3254's severely damaged frame eventually came back to haunt it, and after pulling one final Christmas holiday train on the 2nd of December of that year, the locomotive was taken out of service and has remained on static display, usually inside the roundhouse at Steamtown, while occasionally being brought out and placed on display at various locations around the site for people's viewing pleasure ever since. I was lucky enough to see the 3254 in person when it was on display outside once almost 3 years ago now. Here's a photo of me standing with the locomotive. This was taken back in early August of 2023, so almost 11 years after the locomotive's final run back in early December of 2012. As stated earlier, 3254 has not operated since its last excursion in 2012, and because it's got a busted frame, and most likely due to how worn out it and the rest of the locomotive itself quite possibly is after 45 more years of operating after the accident that happened back in 1941, many people believe it will most likely never operate again. However, here is where what has been on my mind for quite possibly the last 5 years comes in. I don't know why, but for some reason, whenever someone says that 3254 will never run again, it just gives me the impression that they think that it'll just remain on static display forever, which, well, I'm pretty sure everybody knows that nothing lasts forever. Sure, if the team at Steamtown continue to work on the locomotive to maintain its current condition, then yeah, 3254 might last for, at the very least, a long time yet. But here's the thing, there are dozens of steam locomotives being restored to operational condition right now, and there are also dozens of projects to build entirely new steam locomotives, bringing back extinct locomotive classes, especially in the UK, to run in excursion service on both heritage railroads / railways and the main line. And a lot of them are restored and built using parts from other locomotives. I know the US only has like 2 or 3 or maybe even more projects to build entirely new steam locomotives, the most famous one being the T1 Trust's project to build a brand new Pennsylvania Railroad T1 class 4444 duplex type locomotive to be numbered 5550. And yeah, after that locomotive is finished, I'm sure it's possible that they might decide to build another new steam locomotive to bring another extinct locomotive class back from the dead. Hopefully they do. And hopefully more companies and trusts or whatever start forming in the US in the future to build new steam locomotives and bring back extinct locomotive classes. But anyway, the point I'm trying to make here is that there is loads of restoration and new build projects out right now, with new build projects particularly rising in interest, and a lot of them are done with the help of using parts from other locomotives. And so if Steamtown doesn't make the new parts for its restorations to operational condition, I mean, not suggesting that they should start cannibalizing their other locomotives for parts for their operational restorations. Right now, they still need to get Boston and Maine P4A class 462 heavy Pacific type steam locomotive number 3713 up and running, and that locomotive doesn't need a parts donor. But I'm just saying, for their future restorations and also other heritage railroads / railways restorations and future standard gauge steam locomotive new builds in the US, if they need a parts donor and other heritage railroads / railways and new build companies need spare parts, and 3254 has some good parts that can be used, they might all end up getting used up until only all the worn out stuff is left. And if that happens, if no amount of work or technological advancements can get the locomotive back to operational condition, and it does get cannibalized for all its decent and good parts until all that's left are its worn out shot parts, 3254 just possibly might eventually have to be scrapped. Now, before you start banging your keyboard and yelling, "We're in the 21st century and the preservation era, we don't scrap steam locomotives anymore," Great Western Railway 2800 class locomotive number 2861 got scrapped and cannibalized for parts. It's happened before. But anyway, this was just something else I wanted to get off my chest. And yeah, I don't think I've got anything left to add, so yeah. catch you all in the next one.